Well, now take a look at deontology. This is derived from the word deon, which is Greek for the word duty, not as in howdy doody or doggy duty, but in terms of obligations. It's the view that certain features of an action are intrinsically wrong or right, and it's typically contrasted against the consequentialist positions we looked at before, such as consequentialism in general, ethical egoism, and utilitarianism. The difference is, boiled down a bit, is that with consequentialism, it's the consequences of the actions that matter in terms of assessing the value, positive or negative, for the action. With deontology, again boiled down a bit, it is the action itself that is either positive or negative in value. Now we're going to focus on what are known as rule deontological theories. Not surprisingly, these are rule-following moral positions, and the way they define good and bad, pretty straightforward. An action would be wrong if it violates the correct moral rules. An action would be right if it conforms to or follows the correct moral rules. An action that is not covered by the rules, neither prohibited nor endorsed, would be neutral. So for the rule deontologist, actions have intrinsic value. Now, the rule deontologist has to provide the correct rules. One option is to provide a list of rules, kind of like you'd see in a rule book or set of laws or policies. To use a classic religious example, you can think of the 10 Commandments. Don't lie, don't steal, don't covet, don't get caught. Now, another alternative is to have a rule for generating more rules, because one obvious disadvantage with a list of rules is that if something is not covered by that list, you run into the problem of how do you add to that list. If you have, say, a set of rules that are set, such as typically religious rules, then you run into the challenge of what do you do when you encounter something new technology, new processes, etc. So, for example, when attempting to apply, say, biblical rules to things like stem cell research or cloning, one has to, at best, interpret the rules in the context of new technology. And so in many ways, having a rule for making rules, as Kant, as we'll see, gives, seems advantageous in some ways. Now another well-known philosophically, deontologist was a fellow named Ross. He believed that the rules would be found through intuitions of those who are thoughtful and well-educated people, presumably himself. Now Kant takes the rules to be absolute. So going back to our spectrum of morality, when we look at our good dead friend Immanuel Kant, we'll place him in the category of those who believe that morality is absolute. There's no exceptions to the correct rules. Now in contrast, Ross held that rules are objective, but they can be overridden by other rules. So he'd be classified in our spectrum of morality as being an objectivist. Famous proponents of deontology include Immanuel Kant, Ross, and Rawls. Now, why do people like this particular theory? Well, first, it provides clear and definite answers, straightforward rules. And so you have, if you have a theory that's a deontological theory, you have guides for actions in the forms of rules. And of course, people tend to be accustomed to following rules. There is also the correspondence with law. Now finally, just as we saw that consequentialism seems to match our intuitions that it's the consequences that matter sometime, deontology, interestingly or boringly enough, also matches our intuitions, namely that some actions are just right and others are just wrong, and that the consequences are not critical in this matter. For example, in the section on consequentialism, I gave the example of you being a new doctor at a hospital on an island, all the other doctors are away, and a plane crashes. And there's a pilot and 5 passengers. They're all badly injured. And you have to choose between saving the pilot and letting the other passengers die, or saving all the passengers and letting the pilot die. And of course, in general, most people's intuitions say, well, assuming we don't know who these people are, they literally fell from the sky, the idea is to generally go with saving the 5 passengers, because 5 is more than 1. Now let's change the scenario a bit. Suppose a plane crashes, and now we still have 6 badly injured people. Or rather, let's change that to 5. Well, 5 badly injured people. And you need, blood and so forth, organs to save them. And it just so happens, on the same day the crash occurred, a hermit from the island has come in for his yearly checkup. And in one of those amazing philosophical coincidences, he's a perfect match in terms of being a donor for all 5 people. But of course, removing all that blood and all those organs will kill him. So the moral choice is, do you remove the organs from the person and the blood to save those 5 people, or you let the 5 people die in order to avoid killing the 1 person? And it's typically argued that intuitively, the action of killing someone, even to save 5 people, in this case an innocent person, would just be wrong. So it's not the consequences, saving 5 versus 1, that matters. It's the view that killing a person to save others, a person who is innocent, is just wrong. Now, as you might imagine, there's all sorts of complexities that can be added to this, drawing distinctions between killing and letting die, but that generally illustrates our view that intuitively we think some things are just wrong, and that some things are just right. And that brings us to the end of our brief look at deontology, and next we'll turn to looking at Kantian ethics, looking at the introduction, and then turning to a look at a brief excerpt from Kant's Principles of the Metaphysics of Morals and his dreaded categorical imperative.